Man is condemned to be free, because once thrown into the world, he is responsible for everything he does. Jean-Paul Sartre. But what does that really mean? And why should you care? You wake up. Same alarm, same routine, same suffocating feeling that something is desperately wrong with your life. But you can't quite put your finger on what it is. Sound familiar? Here's the thing most people don't realize. That weight you feel, that crushing sense of emptiness, it's not a bug in the system, it's a feature, and understanding why, well, that might just save your life. The Sunday night syndrome. Let me paint you a picture. It's Sunday night. You're looking in the mirror, and suddenly it hits you like a freight train. You're absolutely fed up. Fed up with the routine. The same broken promises, the same mistakes on repeat. The week hasn't even started yet, and you already know exactly how it's going to go. Wake up, get dressed, eat breakfast, go to work, come home, sleep, repeat. Weeks turn into months, months into years. And somewhere along the way, you realize you're not living, you're just existing. At first, there's comfort in predictability, but comfort becomes a cage. And that cage? It's invisible, which makes it even more dangerous. Time slips through your fingers like sand. Those promises you make to yourself? Next month, everything will be different. They dissolve faster than sugar in rain. What starts as a plan for change becomes the inertia of identical days. Life becomes an endless cycle without a single pause to breathe. But here's what's really crushing. It's not just the repetition of tasks that drains you. It's the repetition of the same mistakes. Getting into toxic relationships. Again. Clinging to destructive habits. Again. Postponing decisions that have been screaming for attention for years. Again. It's like watching the same terrible movie over and over, hoping for a different ending. But the ending never changes. Because you never change. Human beings are incredible at adapting to discomfort. We become accomplices to our own stagnation. We normalize the abnormal. We accept the unacceptable. But what if I told you that exhaustion isn't your enemy? What if that soul-crushing fatigue is actually trying to tell you something? The stranger in your own life. Since childhood, we're handed a script. Grow up, study hard, get a good job, start a family, grow old, die. Simple, right? Linear, predictable, safe. But what happens when you realize that script doesn't fit? When you feel like a stranger in your own life? The feeling of not belonging shows up like a knot in your throat, a constant unease that follows you everywhere. It's not just about feeling out of place in a group. It's deeper than that. It's the quiet suspicion that maybe you were born in the wrong time, the wrong place, as if everyone else knows how to dance to some invisible song while you can't even hear the melody. This feeling leads to the big questions. Who am I? What am I doing here? Why does nothing feel right? These questions echo in your mind, but the answers, they never seem satisfying. They're always just out of reach. Some people try to force themselves to fit in. They mold themselves into what's expected. They suffocate their own essence to match the crowd. Others withdraw completely. They give up on finding belonging altogether. They become hermits in their own lives. But here's what Sartre understood, that most people miss. Maybe the answer isn't in trying to fit in. Maybe that feeling of displacement is actually a sign that something greater is waiting to be discovered. The void that cannot be filled. Existential emptiness doesn't arrive with fanfare. It creeps in gradually, like fog rolling over a city. At first, it's just a faint dissatisfaction, a feeling that something is missing. Then people try to fill it with distractions, excessive work, impulsive shopping, endless binge watching. Society offers an infinite menu of escapes. A new phone will bring happiness. A vacation will bring peace. A promotion will bring fulfillment. But deep down, none of it truly helps. The satisfaction is fleeting. Like sugar, it gives you a quick high, then leaves you crashing harder than before. Soon, the restlessness returns, as if something is always out of place, always wrong. The problem is that these solutions are like painkillers. They numb the pain for a while, but they don't heal the wound. A person can spend years busy, distracted, never facing the real void inside them. And the more they run from it, the larger it grows. The escape becomes a habit, a vicious cycle where silence is terrifying, because in silence, everything that has been ignored comes rushing to the surface. No wonder so many people fear loneliness. It forces them to look at themselves without any filters, without any masks, without any excuses. But what if the answer isn't in filling the void? What if the answer is in understanding it? Instead of looking for distractions, what if you asked a different question? Why is this emptiness here? What is it trying to show me? Philosophy and psychology both teach the same truth. The meaning of life isn't found outside, it's found within. Those who face their emptiness with honesty discover something surprising. It isn't an enemy, it's an invitation. An invitation to truly know themselves. The illusion of the fixed self. Who are you really? Think about it for a moment. Throughout your life, you've accumulated labels. Your name, your profession, your personality, your preferences, your memories. But do those things truly define who you are? If you lose your job, do you stop being you? If you move to a new city, do you become someone else? If you undergo a deep personal transformation, do you cease to exist? Identity seems fixed, solid, permanent. But in reality, it's always changing. The problem is that most people cling to a static version of themselves. They believe they are a set of unchanging traits. But the truth is more unsettling and more liberating. You are in constant reconstruction. Every moment, every choice, every experience shapes what you call me. The search for self-knowledge is confusing precisely because the self isn't a concrete thing. It's a flow. Think of a river. The water is constantly renewing itself, yet we keep calling it the same river. Identity works the same way. Experiences, choices, and external influences shape what we call me. But if everything is always changing, is there anything truly permanent within us? Or are we holding on to an illusion because we're afraid to admit that we are more undefined than we'd like to believe? This realization can completely transform how you see life. If the self isn't fixed, then no one is doomed to be who they've always been. Someone who sees themselves as insecure can develop confidence. Someone who feels lost can build a new path. Someone who believes they're broken can heal. The problem isn't change, it's resisting change. And it's in that resistance that many people stay trapped, without realizing that the only way to truly know themselves is by accepting that identity isn't a final destination. It's an endless process of discovery. Beyond I think, therefore I am, René Descartes revolutionized philosophy with a simple realization. He could doubt everything, his senses, his memories, even the world itself. But there was one thing he couldn't deny, the fact that he was thinking. And from that, he coined his famous phrase, I think, therefore I am. To Descartes, existence was directly tied to the ability to think. But does this idea really answer the question of who we are? If thought defines existence, what happens in the moments when we're not thinking? What about when you're sleeping? Or lost in a moment of pure joy? Do you stop existing? The influence of this reasoning is immense in modern society. Intellect is valued as proof of identity. The mind is everything. But this leads to a dangerous disconnection from the actual experience of being alive. If someone believes they only exist while thinking, they become trapped in their heads, disconnected from their body, disconnected from their emotions, disconnected from the present moment. No wonder so many people feel lost. They live inside their own heads, but don't know how to truly exist. Are we only our thoughts? Or is there something beyond them? Something that cannot be reduced to mere logical reasoning? The Cartesian idea is a starting point, not a final answer. By limiting identity to thought, Descartes overlooks the depth of human experience. Yes, we are made of memories, but we're also made of sensations, intuitions, silence. The challenge is to realize that existence doesn't need to be constantly proven. You don't have to think to be. Sometimes, you just have to feel. The observer behind the thoughts. But this is where things get even more interesting. If thought doesn't define who we are, then what does? Jean-Paul Sartre took Descartes' ideas and pushed them to their logical conclusion. He posed an even more unsettling question. What if the self is just an illusion? Here's his reasoning. If we are capable of observing our own thoughts, then there must be a separation between the one who thinks and the one who observes. But if there's an observer within us, then who is it? What is it? This idea dismantles the notion of a fixed and permanent self. It suggests that what we call identity may be nothing more than a fleeting reflection of consciousness, like a mirror that shows an image but holds nothing solid behind it. This concept can be disturbing. Most people cling to the idea of a well-defined identity. We like to believe that we are a coherent set of memories, beliefs, and desires. But if the self is just a constantly shifting flow, what remains? For Sartre, the absence of a fixed self isn't a problem, it's freedom. If no one is bound to an unchangeable essence, then there's room to create and recreate your own existence at any moment. What once seemed like a terrifying void can become an open field of possibilities. What does this mean in practice? It means no one has to be defined by past mistakes, by perceived limitations, by the expectations placed upon them. It means that every choice made in the present redefines who you are. But there's a dilemma in this freedom. If there's no fixed self, then who is making these decisions? Is consciousness just an empty space where everything happens without a real center? The stage without an actor. If the self is not a fixed entity, then what remains? Sartre believed that consciousness is not an object, but rather an empty space where thoughts, emotions, and perceptions constantly arise and fade away. Like a stage where different scenes unfold, but without a permanent actor. This explains why people often feel like they are completely different, depending on the moment, their mood, their circumstances. If consciousness is just a flow, is there anything within us that is truly solid? This idea may seem unsettling at first. Most people want to believe there's a stable self, a core of identity that remains unchanged throughout life. But the truth is that human experience suggests otherwise. Think about how drastically you can change over the years. What made sense in your youth can seem naive in old age. What was once a dream may become irrelevant. So what exactly keeps us cohesive? If everything changes, what truly defines us? Interestingly, this perspective doesn't have to lead to despair. On the contrary, it can be liberating. If there's no fixed self, then no one is doomed to remain who they are. Identity is not a burden to carry. It's something that can be constantly renewed. But there's an inevitable consequence to this freedom. If everything is in flux, then even the societal constraints placed upon identity are fragile. And this brings us to an even deeper question. If the self is in constant transformation, who is writing the script? The masks we wear. From birth, society teaches us to wear masks. First, we're the obedient child. Then, the model student. Later, the competent professional. And in between all of this, we try to find an identity that makes sense. But what if deep down, all of this is just a role imposed on us? Sartre and other philosophers argue that identity is not something we're born with. It's shaped by cultural expectations, like an actor learning their role in the theater of life. But how much of our lives are we simply acting without realizing it? The problem is that over time, many people confuse their role with who they truly are. Someone raised to believe they must always be strong, successful, and emotionally unshakable might spend their entire life trying to fit that script, without ever questioning it. But what happens when someone realizes they don't fit the role they were given? Internal conflict arises. The feeling that something is wrong, without knowing exactly what. Is freedom found in meeting expectations, or in rejecting them? If identity is a role, that means it can be rewritten. Who makes the rules of this theater? Who decides the characters we play? If everything we are has been shaped by culture, then that also means we have the power to create a new narrative. But to do so, we must break free from the chains of perfectionism and the need for validation. Two forces that keep us locked into roles we never truly chose. The prison of perfection, the desire to be flawless, admired, recognized. Perfectionism often begins as a legitimate desire to excel, but it quickly turns into a prison. Every decision must be perfect. Every word carefully calculated. Every action must meet expectations. But whose expectations? The problem with perfectionism is that it doesn't seek excellence. It seeks approval, and the validation of others becomes an addictive fuel, one that is never enough. No matter how much effort you put in, there's always another standard to reach, another comparison that makes you feel like you're never enough. This pattern shows up in every aspect of life. In work, it means never being able to finish anything unless it's perfect, which often means it never gets finished at all. In relationships, it means being afraid to make mistakes, to appear vulnerable, to fall short of expectations. And in your own identity, it means being trapped in an idealized version of yourself, leaving no room for flaws or imperfections. The result? Exhaustion, anxiety, and the constant feeling of never being good enough. But where does this need for perfection come from? Who really set this impossible standard? The truth is that perfectionism is a trap. It makes you seek outside what can only be found within. No amount of praise, achievements, or validation will ever be enough if you don't already believe in your own worth. But to break free from this cycle, you must accept imperfection. And more than that, see it as an essential part of the human experience. Only then can you abandon the endless chase for approval, making way for something far more authentic, the freedom to simply be. The metamorphosis of identity. Franz Kafka captured the feeling of alienation like few others. In The Metamorphosis, Gregor Samsa wakes up transformed into an insect, unable to recognize himself in his own body. But the true tragedy of the story isn't the physical transformation. It's the fact that his family rejects him the moment he ceases to be useful. This metaphor reflects an uncomfortable truth. Many people only feel valued as long as they fulfill a socially acceptable role. But what happens when that role disappears? What remains when someone can no longer meet expectations? This identity crisis can emerge at many points in life. A professional who dedicated decades to their career feels worthless upon retirement. Someone who was always defined by a relationship no longer knows who they are after a breakup. The sense of disconnection comes from the clash between who you truly are and what others expect you to be. And just like Gregor Samsa, many end up isolated, unable to recognize themselves outside the role they once played. But is this loss of identity a tragedy, or could it be an opportunity? The great lesson from Kafka is that identity should never depend solely on external acceptance. The real issue isn't losing a role, it's never having discovered who you are beyond it. When an identity crisis comes, it can be painful, but it can also be an invitation to rebuild. The challenge is not to desperately cling to what no longer makes sense, but to face change as an inevitable part of existence. And if identity is something that is built, then the essential question becomes, who do you want to become now? Deconstructing the ego. If identity is a social construct, that means everything you believe yourself to be can be deconstructed and rebuilt. The problem is that the ego, that inner voice insisting on defining you, doesn't like change. It creates a fixed narrative. You are this way, and will always be this way. But that's just an illusion. Anyone who has gone through major life changes knows this. The person you were 5 years ago might not even exist anymore. So if the ego is just a story told over and over again, why not write a new version? Often, resistance to transformation comes from the fear of losing what's familiar, even if what's familiar is a burden. If you've spent your entire life believing you must always be strong, admitting vulnerability feels unacceptable. If you've always seen yourself as incapable of making decisions, taking control of your life can feel terrifying. But every reconstruction begins with the same realization. Nothing is set in stone. Identity is clay, not rock. This means that no one is doomed to be a prisoner of their own story. If you've been shaped by culture, by trauma, by the expectations of others, then you also have the power to break free from those chains. But this requires one crucial first step: letting go of the need to prove who you are, and simply being. But how do you do that in a world that insists on labeling and defining you? Perhaps the answer lies in abandoning the weight of the ego itself and learning to see life differently. The power of presence. The human mind is restless. It spends half its time stuck in the past, replaying mistakes and regrets. The other half, projecting future scenarios, trying to anticipate problems that may never happen. But what about now? Most people move through life on autopilot, without truly noticing what's happening around them. This is why so many feel constant emptiness, not because something is missing, but because they're never fully present to experience life as it is. Happiness isn't found in great achievements. It's found in the small moments that often go unnoticed. The warmth of the sun on your face, the smell of coffee in the morning, an honest conversation. It may seem too simple, but this is a truth that few are willing to accept. The present is the only place where life truly happens. Those who learn to connect with it discover a peace that doesn't depend on external circumstances. But this requires a shift in perspective, to stop chasing something grand and start finding meaning in what's already here. This doesn't mean that dreams and plans are irrelevant, but they can't be the only source of meaning. What's the point of achieving what you desire if your mind is already occupied with the next goal before you even enjoy the moment? Being present doesn't mean giving up on the future. It means learning to live the journey without rushing, without anxiety. And perhaps in that process, life will stop feeling like a problem to be solved and start simply being lived. The invitation in exhaustion, existential exhaustion, isn't just a burden. It's a signal. It appears when something inside you can no longer bear to continue on the same path. But instead of seeing it as a problem, what if you viewed it as an invitation? That overwhelming feeling of burnout might be a warning that the life you're living no longer makes sense, that something needs to change. The problem is many people try to ignore it. They drown themselves in distractions. They hope that one day things will magically get better. But does that day ever really come? The truth is, exhaustion doesn't disappear on its own. It only grows when it's ignored. The suffocating routine, toxic relationships that add nothing, empty commitments, all of it weighs you down until your body and mind simply can't take it anymore. But burnout isn't the enemy. It's a messenger. When exhaustion takes over, the real question isn't, how can I keep going? But rather, why should I keep going like this? If everything inside you is screaming for change, maybe it's time to finally listen. And change doesn't mean throwing everything away and starting from scratch. Sometimes small decisions are enough to open new paths. Saying no to what drains you, stepping outside of autopilot, trying something new. What matters is recognizing that life doesn't have to be an endless cycle of depletion. Fatigue can be the end of a chapter, but it can also be the beginning of something much greater. The choice is yours. The courage to be. If identity is a construct, and the ego is nothing more than an illusion, then what are we really? This question can be unsettling because most people spend their lives clinging to something fixed, to a role that gives them a sense of security. But what if true freedom is found in accepting that there's no unchanging self? That instead of limiting ourselves to a single version of who we are, we can reinvent ourselves at any moment? The greatest challenge isn't discovering a new identity. It's learning to live without the need for a rigid definition. When you stop being tied to other people's expectations, you begin to experience life in a more authentic way, without the pressure to prove something, without the anxiety of meeting an ideal. But this takes courage, the courage to stop hiding behind masks and simply be, without justification, without explanation. Sartre was right. We are condemned to be free. But that condemnation is also our greatest gift, because in that freedom lies the power to create ourselves anew. Every single day. The question isn't who you are. The question is who you choose to become. The choice is yours. So here's what I want you to ask yourself. Are you truly living your life? Or are you just playing a role? Are you being who you really are? Or just what others expect you to be? The weight you feel isn't a sign that something is wrong with you. It's a sign that something is right. Your soul is refusing to accept a life that doesn't fit. That exhaustion isn't weakness, it's strength. It's your authentic self fighting to break free from the prison of other people's expectations. The void you feel isn't emptiness, it's potential. It's the space where your true self is waiting to be born. And that feeling of not belonging, it's not a bug, it's a feature. It's proof that you're meant for something more than the script society handed you. The question isn't whether you'll change. You're already changing. Every moment, every breath, every heartbeat. The question is whether you'll choose to direct that change. or whether you'll let it happen to you. Sartre understood what most people never realize. Freedom isn't something you find, it's something you create. And that creation begins the moment you stop asking permission to be yourself. The moment you stop apologizing for who you are. The moment you stop trying to fit into someone else's definition of normal. Your life is waiting. Not tomorrow, not next week. Right now. The only question left is, what are you going to do with it? The choice, as always, is yours.